The PMQs Unpacked is coming live on Times Radio and on the YouTube channel. I think we're going to throw the big switch on the cameras any moment now. So go to the Times Radio YouTube channel. We'll go to YouTube, search Times Radio, click on. You can see us live right now. Joining me live in the studio, Lara Spirit, Times Red Box reporter. What do we think's going to happen at PMQs today?
Well, I think if today's PMQs is anything like the last couple that we've seen, you're likely to see Keir Starmer major on this nothing works topic, this idea that public services under a decade of Tory rule have considerably deteriorated. The last couple of times, you remember, we had that one about ambulance waits for a heart attack victim with a kind of new framing around that. If we called an ambulance now, how long would it take? Last week, he majored on probation services. But, of course, there was the Nadeem Zahawi affair last week and the kind of half-throated defence that we got from Rishi Sunak on that inquiry. Now, attention has now turned to Dominic Raab, who is the other cabinet minister who was facing a formal investigation, and new reports this morning around that issue, I think, will mean that it would be unlikely, given that Keir Starmer wants to attach this kind of the standards issue to Rishi Sunak, if he didn't go for that as well today.
It was interesting. Last week, he sort of split them, didn't he? He did 3 questions on the failures of probation and then 3 questions on Zahawi, just sort of, so it wasn't seem to have just been banging on about that. So it might be that he could do the same thing. We might have some strikes and a bit of Dominic Raab.
I think you're right that if you've got the largest coordinated day of strike action since 2011, it would be very unlikely for somebody who considers himself a future Prime Minister that wants to run an election with public services at the heart of their campaign to not talk about that today. But equally irresistible, I think, is those kind of questions around Tory standards and sleaze, and the idea that in order to pin Conservative failings to Rishi Sunak that kind of led to that initial bounce for Keir Starmer in the polls, that Rishi Sunak personally needs to be associated with the failures of people who've fallen short of standards around his cabinet table. And Prime Minister's questions is a perfect avenue for that, because it's your only opportunity really to visibly be questioning the leader on those issues.
2 things I want to might come up is Rishi Sunak's 100 days tomorrow. We're going to do a lot of that on the show tomorrow. And so you know, that might be a framing that Keir Starmer uses. I suspect Rishi Sunak might talk at some point about Keir Starmer's union paymasters, particularly if he goes on strikes.
Yeah, I mean, that's been ubiquitous in the former Prime Minister's questions. We've seen that. It's one of Rishi Sunak's favourite attack lines, which is this idea that comes up in number 10 polling that, voters don't know whether they can trust necessarily Keir Starmer. Does he say what he really believes? Rishi Sunak very keen to, I'm sure you'll see today when there's questions about strike, recourse to what Rishi Sunak considers to be a very popular policy of his, that minimum service strike legislation. He'll say Keir Starmer isn't supporting that. Why is that? That's their plan to get some way around the strike.
It was really interesting this week, the battle of the Twitter graphics. You had the Conservatives tweeting, Labour have just said that they support schools shutting. And then Labour were tweeting saying the Tories want to sack the teachers and the nurses. It's the same piece of legislation. They both think that they've got sort of resonance with them, with their conflicting opinions on it.
Yeah, and some in Labour, quite interestingly, not unhappy with the fight over the minimum service strike legislation, because they understand that they'd had such an ambiguous policy on strikes generally before, that in order to focus their opposition on this particular form of legislation means that they can deflect attention away from the fact that actually they don't, in the eyes of some people, have a realistic solution for how they would end the industrial action besides getting around the table.
It was
anyway.
really interesting. Steve Reed, the Shadow Justice Secretary, was on Times Radio the breakfast this morning. Couldn't really answer the question as to what he would do, but just kept using the phrase government in waiting. Did it 4 or 5 times quite quickly. Loads of you are already online on the YouTube channel. Mike, as it says, evening from Thailand. Marie's in Indiana. Paul says, good morning from the A303, London bound. I hope you're not driving, Paul. Hello from Nashville, says Drake. Yo from Wiltshire, says John. Stevens in Grey, Leicester. Different Stevens in Taunton. So do hop on, do say hello if you want to. Just finally, Lara, you'll be back after 12:30 with the best of the rest, and then the Red Box PMQs Unpacked email. How can people get that?
Yep, so subscribers to Redbox will get an email at 2:30 today, which will include all of our best analysis on Prime Minister's questions straight to your inbox for those who get the Redbox email already. If you haven't, you can go to the subscriber page of The Times and sign up to that email today.
Very good. thetimes.co.uk/Redbox. Lara, lovely to see you. We will bring you PMQs Unpacked live from 12 o'clock. All the MPs just gathering in the Commons now. Looks a little bit thin on the Tory side. Maybe that will fill up a bit. We've got, another 4 or 5 minutes before that happens. But as Lara was just saying, we've got strikes right across the country today, hitting lots of schools as well. Which means children are at home, so no swearing. If you are a child listening, welcome to Times Radio. If it doesn't work out, you could end up as a presenter. Now, what we thought we'd do is provide you some little lessons for you throughout the day. So it all counts as homeschooling. We've asked some of the brightest and best at the Times for their 1-minute lessons. So now it's time for your English lesson with teacher, Mr. Cohen.
This is a lesson my father taught me. My father was Alan Corran, who was, at the time he gave me the advice, in about 1980 when I was 11. He was editor of Punch, a columnist in the Evening Standard and the Times, a writer of million-selling, best-selling books. I was set an essay, I think it was called Dinosaurs Are Different, a piece of creative writing. And I sat down, what am I going to write, Dad? And he said, look at the title. Whatever comes into your head, whatever the first idea is, throw it away. Because everyone's going to think of that. And then when you get a second idea, think about it, think about how it would work, and then throw that away as well, because the bright kids are going to come up with that. And then wait until you have a third idea and write that, because only you're going to come up with that. It works through GCSEs, through A-level, whether it's a creative writing thing in English or a modern language or whatever else. It works if you're writing an essay. It works if it's economics, although possibly Kwasi Kwarteng went too far. But anyway, it'll work at university, it'll work in your career. A day does not go by when I don't apply that rule. Throw out the first idea, throw out the second idea, write the third one, and you'll go far.
Very good, Mr. Cohen, Giles Cohen, with his English lesson there, which I assume means he recorded 2 of those, which he then deleted before sending us the third one, because that would have had to be his third idea. So what was his first and second idea? Anyway, you'll be able to read Giles, of course, in the Times and the Sunday Times, in the Times every week, and we'll have. I think we can squeeze 1 or 2 more lessons in before the end of the show, so we'll bring you those as well. But up next on Times Radio, we'll bring you PMQs Unpacked, live from the House of Commons, with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak going at it across the dispatch box. All being well, Tim Shipman, his travel plans have been slightly disrupted by the strike action, but all being well, he will be here to pause the action live from the House of Commons. PMQs Unpacked is next. Then Marianne Fostrop is here from 1. She'll be speaking to Ian Baum, who accused his ex-partner, the former Wales rugby player Gareth Thomas, of deceptively transmitting HIV to him. Hell of an interview. That's Jane and Fee will be here from 3. They've got Jojo Moyes on the show. I was on the boat with Jojo, so it'll be nice to see her. And then John Pino is here with Times Radio Drive from 5. But don't go anywhere. PMQs Unpacked is next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. In a moment, PMQs Unpacked, live from the House of Commons. But first, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. The biggest strike in a decade is underway. Around 100,000 teachers are thought to have walked out across England and Wales in a row over pay, closing many schools. Trains, universities and airports are also being hit by industrial action. Meanwhile, it seems the walkouts by around 500,000 workers have had an impact on the roads. TomTom says its data shows a dramatic reduction in congestion levels during this morning's rush hour compared to last week. A fraudster and his accomplice have been jailed for at least 35 years for murdering a 71-year-old businesswoman to get hold of her life savings. Louise Cam was strangled with a hairdryer cord at her house she owned in North London in 2021. A tiny radioactive capsule's been found in Australia after a needle in a haystack search covering hundreds of miles of road. It's been missing for days after falling off a lorry as it travelled through the outback. And Chelsea have officially confirmed the signing of Enzo Fernandez, who's become the most expensive player in British football. The Argentina World Cup winner cost just short of £107 million. And we'll have a full news and sport roundup at past, but now live on Times Radio and here on the Times Radio YouTube channel. It's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And yes, he's made it. He's made it. He's beaten the strikes. Tim Shipman in the nick of time.
I don't think anyone beats the strikes, do they?
Well, you're here crucially.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
we'll be interested to see if Keir Starmer talks about strikes or
Do you
lethal chaos. It wasn't lethal, but it was certainly chaos.
It was certainly
My
chaos.
journey in.
I mean, if he does all 6 questions on strike, we know how this goes. He says the government is a disgrace. Why are these strikes happening? And Rishi Sunak says it's your union paymasters.
Yeah. My sister messaged me this morning and said, I predict 2 union paymasters in the next half an hour.
How many? So that's your sister is 2. How many do you think we're going to get?
I think probably that's 1.5 would be the spread, wouldn't it?
spread,
So you
yeah.
buy or sell at that.
I'll go 3.
I'll sell and say it's only 1, which is why I think he might not just do that. I mean, with the last week there was a lot of Nadeem Zahawi, and he's now gone, and still a lot of people saying that wasn't handled the right way. And what arguments has Starmer got to build ahead of the next election? One is that this government isn't very good at governing, which is where strikes comes in, and the other is that there's a bit of a whiff of something not quite right about them, and that may be why we hear a bit of a 2-pronged assault again this week.
It's 100 days tomorrow. Rishi Sunak's been Prime Minister. Do you think Keir Starmer might frame it like that? Lots of people sort of looking back over all that he's done or hasn't.
It would be an interesting framing device, and you can think of a few sort of centenary jokes. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but you're the stand-up comedian, Matt, so I'm sure in the next half an hour you'll come up with something.
We'll do that on the show tomorrow. Luke says he thinks he's going to say union paymasters once per question. Let us know what you think. Go on the Times Radio YouTube channel. You can watch along as we pause the action live in the House of Commons. Let us know what you think. Andy's in Taunton, Jonathan's in Bewdley, we've got Peter in Barton-on-Sea, Susan in Portsmouth. Hello from Wiltshire, says Wendy. And somebody's having a hot chocolate on the go in Bourneville.
Seems like the right place for it.
Sort of place to be going on. Very good. Let us know what you think. Hop on the YouTube channel as we watch along. We go live to the House of Commons for question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his words about the First Minister of Wales and the sad loss of his wife? Everybody, I think, knows just how close they were, and I know that he's absolutely devastated by her loss at the weekend.
That's Mark Drakeford's wife, Claire, who died at the weekend.
Briefly emerged from his hibernation at the weekend, he raised more questions than answers. So, in the interests of integrity and accountability, can he set the record straight? Did his now former chair tell government officials that he was under investigation by the taxman before or after the Prime Minister appointed him?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I appointed the independent adviser to investigate this matter fully. He has set out his findings in detail over the weekend, and on receipt of those findings, I took action, and I'd refer the honourable gentleman to the independent adviser's report.
Well, I wasn't expecting that.
No, it was quite a precise sort of question. Yeah, though I think it's I think what Starmer was driving at there is that while Nadeem Zahawi was keeping things about his taxpayers under wraps for quite some time, if I can remember correctly, I think he finally said something to Whitehall in September, and Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister in October. So he's trying to sort of tease out, yes, you set up your inquiry, you got to the truth, you sacked the guy, but how did it happen to start with? Why wasn't it prevented in the first place? And I think, a lot of Tories are wondering why the system didn't work as well, really.
And given that everyone in politics or journalism knew that he was, at least, well, there'd been reports he'd been investigated. It was possible someone could have asked a proactive question as well.
Well, quite. It depends whether you ask questions that you know the answer to, or you ask questions that sometimes you don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
That happens both in government and at Prime Minister's questions. And I think Keir Starmer asked that question knowing the answer.
It'd be interesting to see as well, because there's reports in the Times today that Rishi Sunak was warned about giving a job to Dominic Raab as well. So this may well be where Keir Starmer is going.
The other thing that was interesting, he sort of talked about him emerging from hibernation at the start, which is obviously a sort of jibe about Sunak keeping his head down. But if you keep talking about how he's sort of weak and is the job too big for him, if you can put the idea of a sort of small vole hibernating into the public's mind, that's also there's a little bit of word association there.
It's interesting. It's like when the Labour Party, under Gordon Brown, tried to cast David Cameron as a chameleon who rode a bike, and they had a sort of computer-generated chameleon on a bike.
Didn't really work.
And by the end, that's quite cute. It was like a cartoon.
It was
character.
a very cute cartoon character. It's like the one where they said they tried to depict him as an ancient sort of throwback to the 80s, and they had a mug with "Fire Up the Quattro" and Cameron sitting on the. As Gene Hunt sitting on and it was the coolest David Cameron's ever looked in his life. The Tories were delighted with that. They started making the mugs themselves.
Yeah. Really interesting. Right, let's go back then. Let's see where this goes next. This is question number 2 from Keir Starmer.
Oh, come on. Anyone picking up a newspaper in July last year would have known that HMRC and the National Crime Agency were investigating months before he appointed him. Mr. Speaker, The Independent, 6th of July, new Chancellor's finances secretly investigated by the National Crime Agency. The Observer, 3 days later, 9th of July, revealed officials raised flag over tax affairs before he was appointed Chancellor. The Financial Times, the next day, 10th of July, pressure bills to explain his finances. Is he saying his officials hid this information from him, or was he just too incurious to ask any questions?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said before at the dispatch box, the usual appointments process was followed with respect to the Minister without portfolio. No issues were raised with me at the time of his appointment, but as the independent advisor's report makes clear, there was a serious breach of the ministerial code, and that's why I took decisive action on receipt of that report.
I took decisive action. I suppose if he keeps repeating it, it'll have an impact. It was basically the same question there from Keir. I mean, as an attempt to sort of move the argument on, it's just the same question again, wasn't it?
Yeah, and one might be tempted to say that Labour politicians spend more time reading the Eye and the Observer than Conservative ones do. But I think the problem here is that it's a perfectly fair line of questioning from Starmer, and he's certainly onto something. But he knows full well that it's the proprietary and ethics team's job to look into this stuff, and they were not told by the Revenue what was going on, and they were not told by Nadeem Zahawi what was going on at the point that he was appointed, and by that point, the dispute he'd had with the Revenue was over, and apparently have no duty to say that there was previously an investigation and he paid a penalty, which seems a bit daft, frankly. On that, both politicians and the senior civil servants in Downing Street agree. And Starmer, while he's making a perfectly fair political point, if he does find himself in Downing Street, might want to do something about that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he'll find himself in the same boat in a couple of years' time.
And actually, there were lots, there were 7 breaches of the ministerial code as judged by the ethics advisor. But a key complaint was the fact that Nadeem Zahawi hadn't been straight, that he literally said things in public which were not true.
Well, he said things in public, he said things to the proprietary and ethics team, and he appears to have said things to at least 2 prime ministers that were untrue.
And that is more crucial in a way than the not paying the tax. I mean,
and this is a lot of the problem
thing,
with the British Constitution. Its strength is that it evolves, and it's not written down, and people don't turn up and say, like they do in America, this thing that was written 200 years ago must be wholly writ now. But it does rely on the system working, and people, going along in the way that Peter Hennessy, that great sort of academic of Whitehall, would say is the good chap's theory. It works when people abide by the unwritten laws.
Yeah.
And in this case, there is a ministerial code. It is written down. Anyone reading it would have been, it's inescapable, the conclusion that Nadeem Zahawi quite fancied the jobs that he was about to get and decided to withhold that information.
Yeah.
If someone does that, then the system needs to be better at identifying where he's told porkies.
Yeah.
And Nadeem Zahawi and people like him in future ought to know that the system will find them out. And in the end, of course, it was leaks and the media that found him out. And the rest of Whitehall seems to have been the fourth estate appears to have left, the third estate in its wake, frankly.
Right, we go back. I can't believe he's going to do all 6 questions on Nadeem Zahawi, given that's what he didn't even do that last week when he was still in post. But let's go back then to the House of Commons. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
So, in relation to his former chair, his defence is, nobody told me, I didn't know, I didn't ask any questions. Is the Prime Minister now also going to claim that he was the...
Order, Prime Minister. Mr Gullis, we heard enough last week. I can't hear what you're saying. I might not be able to hear what you're saying, but I can certainly see your mouth moving. It'll be moving outside if it continues. Prime Minister.
That's Tory MP Jonathan Gullis getting ticked off.
So for his former chair, nobody told me, I didn't know, I didn't ask any questions. Is the Prime Minister now also going to claim that he's the only person completely unaware of serious allegations of bullying against the Deputy Prime Minister before he appointed him?
Prime Minister.
So, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman asked these questions about what was known, and I followed due process. I appointed an independent adviser as soon as I was made aware of new information. The independent advisers conducted this process. But if he is so concerned about what people are saying and is so concerned about behaviour in public life, then recently one of his own MPs was forced to speak out because being in his party had reminded her of being in an abusive relationship. And then his own office was caught undermining her.
So Labour MP
He ought
Rosie
to be
Duffield was
supporting
talking about.
her and her colleagues, but if he can't be trusted to stand up for the women in his party, he can't be trusted to stand up for Britain.
Keir Starmer shaking his head at that one.
Well, as you predicted,
we are now on
we've moved on to Dominic Raab.
On the front of the Times today, Number 10 was warned of Raab issues before Sunak promoted him. Civil servants flagged there have been issues with Dominic Raab in his previous departments before Rishi Sunak decided to bring him back into government. Downing Street sources insisted the Prime Minister was not directly told and that officials never advised against appointing Raab. But obviously, and actually, I think he got a bit of a muddle with his timeline there because it's not the independent ethics advisor that he's got looking into this because he hadn't got around to appointing. It was Adam Tolley KC, who is investigating complaints.
So many
against
sleaze advisors, so little time.
And the complaints about his behaviour when he was Foreign Secretary, Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister for Boris Johnson before being sacked by Liz Truss. He denies the bullying. But again, I suppose it's this sort of... There's as ever with politics, there's the facts and there's the perception. That two cases of everyone being aware of issues surrounding someone and the Prime Minister appears not to have thought to ask.
Yes. Look, I would say from my own personal experience that there's a material difference between these two cases. Nadeem Zahawi was a very rich man. He came from Iraq. He made a fortune. He clearly put some of it in tax-efficient bodies and all the rest of it. And there was a general sense that if he ever became a big cheese in politics, that he would be worth a closer look. And I think that was the view of MPs and journalists and all the rest of it. I think there are very few people in Westminster who are not aware of specific, detailed and extensive allegations about Dominic Raab over a period of years in separate departments. And these things are always difficult. You know, when is a complaint a formal complaint? When is it written down? When are they prepared to play ball in cooperating with journalists who have witnesses who say that about this behaviour, said it was, you know, we were told it was bad behaviour. Raab always insisted he was never a bully, and it was always it was quite difficult for a long time until these witnesses started coming forward in more meaningful numbers to get this to the point that it is now. But I defy anyone who's spent any time in Westminster for the last 5 or 6 years to not be aware of the claims that Dominic Raab is at the very most generous, a very hard taskmaster as a Secretary of State, and to a degree that makes other people think that he is a bully. Now, it's not for me to decide whether he is or not. It's for Adam Tolley, KC. But, you know, the idea that Sunak would not have been aware of that, at least in the round, forget even what the Times is revealing. Yeah. You know, he took also a decision to appoint this guy. He'd supported him.
It could be that he was aware. He told him, you know, no more, behave yourself. You know, that could be a defence. Everyone deserves a second chance. He acknowledged to me that there was an issue and we've had no complaints while I've been Prime Minister. That could be a line.
It could, but it's not his line.
It's not his line. It's not his line. I know nothing Seems to be the line of attack. Interestingly, as PMQs is unfolding, there's a protest march making its way through central London as part of the big day of strike action, which is happening right across the country. It's interesting that so far, at least, neither Keir Starmer nor Rishi Sunak have referred to it. Rishi Sunak raising the case of Rosie Duffield, who's the Labour MP for Canterbury, has been a big critic of the Labour Party's policy on trans rights, has faced lots of criticism and abuse as a result. And there was a story a couple of weeks ago about how Matthew Doyle, the Director of Communications for the Labour Party, had been caught being rude about her in a coffee queue. Rishi Sunak basically going from, I knew nothing about my bullying, but why are you not being nicer to Rosie Duffield?
Well, and there is a theme there. You don't have to go back very far in the Labour Party's history to find female journalists taking security guards to Labour Party conference because they were being abused. Various people left the Labour Party, Luciana Berger being the most striking example, for being abused over anti-Semitism. And now this is another of those push-button issues which gets everybody in the Labour Party very hot under the collar. And Rosie Duffield does not like the stance that Starmer and others in her party are pushing. And frankly, if you look at the polls, most of the public don't either.
Well, there we are. Let's find out because it'd be interesting, there could be more of this, if Rishi Sunak's already gone on question number 3, how he keeps this going. Let's go back to the House of Commons. This is Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman. We're bringing you PMQs Unpacked live on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel. We go back to the House of Commons for question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, at the last count, the Deputy Prime Minister was facing 24 separate allegations of bullying. According to recent reports, some of the complainants were physically sick. One says they were left suicidal. How would he feel if one of his friends or relatives was being forced to work for a bully simply because the man at the top was too weak to do anything about it?
Should point out Dominic Raab sitting next to Rishi Sunak.
I noticed he didn't say anything about why one of his own MPs describes being in his own party. And Mr. Niffer, when I was made aware of formal complaints, I instructed a leading independent KC to conduct an investigation because I take action when these things happen. But what did he say at the weekend? He said at the weekend that hate had been allowed to spread unchallenged in the Labour Party under his predecessor. He was speaking as if he wasn't even there. But he was sitting right next to him, supporting him for 4 long years, not challenging. And it is typical of him, Mr. Speaker, declining to lead, sitting on the fence, carping from the sidelines, and never standing up for a principle that matters.
Well, there's quite a lot there. Dominic Raab just sort of staring blankly ahead in the middle of this as if they're not talking about him at all.
I think it's his staring blankly ahead that may have upset some civil servants over the years.
At least he didn't throw a tomato at Keir Starmer.
No formal complaints.
No formal complaints.
Says Sunak, and that's his defence.
And
again, our understanding is lots of people complain, but because they didn't write it down, it was never taken as seriously as it should have done. And now they've started writing it down.
The way that people move around in Whitehall, they end up making a calculation. If you're sort of middle-ranking official, don't make a complaint against the Foreign Secretary because you won't get that job at the Ministry of Justice.
Or keep your head, or have a quiet word with your permanent secretary and find yourself moved to another department without actually making a fuss about it.
Yeah.
But till question 4 for Sunak to deploy the Corbyn defence.
Jeremy Corbyn, yeah. We still haven't.
Though in this case, actually, I mean, to be fair to the guy, Starmer, I think most people would agree, has done a pretty decent job of cleaning up the Labour Party from anti-Semitism. But I know a lot of Labour MPs and a lot of people in the Jewish community who think Starmer did sit there with his mouth shut and refused to say anything because he wanted the votes of Corbyn supporters when he went for the leadership and he didn't want to make a fuss. And there are almost no recorded public comments of Keir Starmer condemning that at the time. So,
in a way that
it's a reasonable argument.
Others who were in the shadow cabinet were quite. I remember interviewing Emily Thornberry, who was incredibly outspoken on that issue while still serving her.
No, he was not a study in courage at that point, it's fair to say.
And actually, to make that speech at the weekend, as Keir Starmer did, which is what Rishi Sunak was talking about hate speech. I mean, it is a reasonable criticism to make.
Yep.
You can't make a speech about how awful it was while you were sat in the shadow cabinet in one of the major jobs as shadow Brexit secretary, trying to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right. Though, I mean, fair dues to Starmer. When he got in, it was his first priority, and he's made a reasonable fist of it. But, politics is a dirty business, and it's a pretty reasonable line of attack from Sunak.
Yeah, so basically, it's already getting a bit dirty. We've still got 2 more to go. We go back to the House of Commons there. This is question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Prime Minister. Keir Starmer. I want to hear both sides, and I'm not going to be interrupted by either side. And I'm particularly looking for people who want to continue this, because we will sort it out today.
Lindsay Hall mainly telling off the Tory
He's just like
side.
one of his predecessors who treated questions about conduct as something to brush off, who thought that ducking responsibility was a perfectly reasonable response for a Prime Minister. At least in fairness, his predecessor didn't go around pretending he was a paragon of integrity and accountability. But on that subject, was it a coincidence that the 2 people who arranged an £800,000 line of credit for the former Prime Minister were both shortlisted for plum jobs at the BBC and the British Council?
Referring to Boris Johnson's finances.
Mr. Speaker, as we addressed previously, the appointments process for the BBC chairman is rigorous, it's transparent, it's set out in a public code of conduct, and indeed, was fully supported not just by an expert panel members, but also by the cross-party DCMS Select Committee, including where Labour members described the appointment as impressive. But Mr. Speaker, back this week in terms of what is actually happening to the people of this country, he voted this week with the unions to oppose minimum safety levels. He voted with Just Stop Oil to water down the public order bill. And what do the unions and Just Stop Oil have in common? They bankroll him and his party, Mr. Speaker.
There we are, finally we got there.
So while he sides with extremist protesters and union bosses, we stand up for hard-working Britons and school children.
I'm waiting to point out that he didn't actually use the phrase paymasters.
Well, he was pretty close. Union barons.
No, I know, but if I was a bookie, I wouldn't pay out on that.
That's true. That is true.
Interesting. Starmer now using the Johnson defence in the other direction, saying, that good old Boris Johnson, he didn't claim to be a saint like you, Prime Minister.
Yeah, you're claiming to be a saint. And obviously it's a reference to the story that Sunday Times had extraordinary reporting on, the ins and outs of Boris Johnson's finances, who tried to help him out. Richard Sharp appears to have got involved in trying to find a guarantor for an £800,000 loan for Boris Johnson shortly before he became chairman of the BBC.
And Boris Johnson, we should stress, says that he's never had any financial advice from Richard Sharp. Unfortunately, my colleagues unearthed a letter in which the Cabinet Secretary told him to stop giving financial advice to Boris Johnson. Well done, Gabriel Pogrund and Harry York, who've done splendid work on this.
Yes, and Boris Johnson is in Washington today, so he's sort of miles away from all of this.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, the point was not even made by Sunak, but obviously the Johnson stuff is really nothing to do with him as Prime Minister. It was all prior. This is just Starmer using question 5 to
sleaze,
pull in more sleaze.
One thing I wanted to go back to, question 4, which I thought was interesting. Rishi Sunak talking about all Keir Starmer does is sits on the fence, carps on the sidelines. Again, that came up again in our most recent focus group.
Yes, I've heard it too.
This is the thing that comes up again and again and again. They just say all Keir Starmer does is oppose and criticise and moan. And I've spoken to people in the Labour Party, and they say we do need to move on and to have our own plans.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was with quite a lot of senior Labour people at the weekend, a sort of social event with a mutual friend, and several of them said to me, well, what do you think his 4 big plans are? Because I don't know.
Yeah.
And we know what Sunak's are, and lots of people are quite rude about them, but we do know what they are now. And I'm struggling to answer that question for Starmer, and I think a lot of people in the Labour Party are too.
Yeah. Which is, it was notable that it appeared to be, again, using, Boris Johnson's number 10 used it all the time. Taking things that come up in focus groups, repeat them back to the public, and then that has resonance. Well, let's see if... I mean, it's quite a mixed bag of bobbins that Keir Starmer's thrown up so far. So let's see if you can tie it all together in a nice little bow, and then Rishi Sunak can put a cherry on top.
After 13 years in power, trying to blame the Labour Party for his failure to sort out the strikes it's rank pathetic. The Tory party's addiction to sleaze and scandal has done huge damage to this country, and the cost to the public keeps adding up. We've got a justice system letting murderers walk the streets, heart attack victims waiting hours for an ambulance, an economy that's shrinking quicker than his leadership. And even I couldn't quite believe it when I saw that his government is expecting taxpayers to pay the legal fees for the member for Uxbridge defending himself over his lockdown rule breaking. £250,000. Surely even this Prime Minister can put his foot down, stand up to his old boss and tell him he made the mess, he can pick up the bill.
Mr. Speaker, he can't stand up to his union bosses. He can't stand up for Britain's school children today. And he can't stand up for the women in his party, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on, we're halving inflation, we're growing the economy, we're reducing debt, we're cutting waiting lists, and we're stopping the boat. While he can't even figure out what he believes in, we'll keep delivering for Britain.
So I think that makes it two
a
union bosses.
A moral victory for
your sister.
For my sister,
yeah.
But... neither of them mentioned paymasters, but we'll have to overlook that.
Well, we'll gloss over that. Interestingly, Rishi Sunak shoehorning in his list of 5. It's one of the really striking things. We talked about it when we did our last focus group. He sort of launched his 5 priorities for the year. And what we haven't had is every minister shoehorning them in to every media appearance until we can all repeat them.
Well, you and I are both old enough to remember when every single Tory press release came with the phrase long-term economic plan in it under David Cameron. We all routinely stopped sticking it in, but they kept putting it in their press releases and in every public statement they made and every broadcast appearance they made. And it's more difficult to canter through 5 priorities. But, I think objectively, Sunak's peroration was rather stronger than Starmer's, to be honest. And I was slightly surprised by Starmer's. Yes, he made some good points, but... he didn't really tie it up with a bow, as you said. And the purpose of this sleaze attack is to sort of say, this Prime Minister can't cope with his own party. Yeah. This Prime Minister isn't big enough to stand up and, he's too busy worrying about his own party to deal with the things that matter, and he's not strong enough to cope with the people on his own benches, let alone the great problems of the world. And he didn't quite say that. Whereas, as you point out, Sunak hit his talking points, and got in his, strike jibes, and
actually slightly showing a bit of leg on the fact that he's obviously annoyed that Keir Starmer didn't talk about strikes at all.
Well, perhaps, and also, the phraseology was interesting as well. Slight hostage to fortune from Sunak. He kept saying, "We're doing this. We're stopping.
Yeah, we are halving inflation.
We are halving inflation. We are stopping the boats. Well,
we are growing the economy."
Not sure you've quite done that yet, mate. Yes. But anyway, but yes, no, I think. After a pretty decent outing from Starmer, I don't think it finished particularly strongly. And again, there were a couple of moments in that. I think question 4 and probably at the end where the Tory MPs were pretty content.
Really cheering, yeah. Rank pathetic. Not sure what to make of that. I probably shouldn't use that again.
My sister messages to say union bosses doesn't count, so she accepts
she's
defeat.
Accepting defeat. There we are. Yeah, I probably won't, given my ability to pronounce a soft R, I might not attempt rank pathetic too often on the radio.
No.
But it probably does sum up the last half an hour. Right, up next, Lara Spirit will come hurtling into the studio to bring us the best of the rest. She's been watching all the backbench contributions so that you don't have to. And then we're going to find out about this, just an incredible story, this, the wolf that killed Ursula von der Leyen's pony. And we'll do the quiz as well. All that in the next half an hour after we get the latest news from Cara Bentley.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. As the biggest strike in more than a decade takes place across the UK, Sir Keir Starmer says it's pathetic that the government tries to blame Labour for the industrial action. But Rishi Sunak hit back at the accusation during Prime Minister's questions.
He can't stand up to his union bosses. He can't stand up for Britain's school children today.
500,000 workers have walked out today from 7 trade unions affecting trains, buses, universities and up to 23,000 schools in England and Wales. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer asked Rishi Sunak several questions about how much he knew about the behaviour of both Nadeem Zahawi and Dominic Raab before they were both investigated. Mr Zahawi was sacked as Conservative Party chair at the weekend for not disclosing a tax dispute with HMRC, and Mr Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, is still being investigated for bullying allegations which he says are nonsense. The Labour leader accused the Prime Minister of being naive and unaware.
When the Prime Minister briefly emerged from his hibernation at the weekend, he raised more questions than answers. So in the interests of integrity and accountability, can he set the record straight? Did his now former chair tell government officials that he was under investigation by the taxman before or after the Prime Minister appointed him?
Mr Sunak simply said the matter has been fully investigated. A 50-year-old man's been sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty of murdering his girlfriend and another man in central London. Lee Peacock must serve at least 39 years for killing Sharon Pickles, who was 46, and 59-year-old Clinton Ashmore. His father previously told police his son had confessed, but Peacock denied murdering them in August 2021, weeks after being released from jail. Windy in the north with showers and then rain, fine in the south. Kane Reeves has the sport.
The record books were rewritten again last night as Premier League clubs broke the spending record in the January transfer window. Chelsea's capture of Argentina midfielder Enzo Fernandez for £106 million took top-flight spending above £815 million. The Premier League spending power hasn't been universally welcomed, with the head of La Liga saying the English game isn't sustainable. Chelsea spent £318 million this window, more than La Liga, the Bundesliga, Serie A and Ligue 1 combined. Chief football writer for The Times, Henry Winter, feels the large spending highlights the success of the Premier League.
There was a period when all the elite players were going to Italy. So look, there's an element of it being cycled. And do I have much sympathy for Real Madrid and Barcelona, who haven't run their clubs particularly well, when they're bleating about it? So look, it's quite nice that the money is centred over here. We have to look at the origin of some of the money. That is a concern. Look, there's a perfect storm at this particular time.
The Times website and app has analysis of what was a record-breaking transfer deadline day. The tournament director of the Australian Open has revealed that Novak Djokovic played the whole of the Grand Slam with a 3-centimetre tear in his hamstring. He went on to win his 10th title, equalling Rafael Nadal's men's record of 22 major singles titles with victory over Stefanos Tsitsipas. Surrey and England all-rounder Tom Curran is to take a break from red ball cricket to prioritise his physical and mental health. Curran will concentrate on his limited overs commitments, having suffered a number of injuries. The 27-year-old says he hasn't ruled out returning to the format as he has unfinished business with Surrey and England. Well, England are currently in ODI action in South Africa, playing the final match of their 3-game series. You can hear live ball-by-ball commentary with our colleagues on TalkSport 2.
This is Times Radio.
Ends the 13th of February. Make this the year you seize the holiday and travel far, travel wide, travel wild, or with a guide. Travel deep, travel long, travel boldly, travel on. Our experts are ready to craft you an unforgettable holiday. Search KUONI and travel with the experts you can trust. Sale ends the 13th of February. At or protected and which recommended.
With TalkTalk, you can speed up and spend less on broadband in 2023. Out of contract on superfast fibre? Double your speed and save on average £125 over 18 months by upgrading to TalkTalk Full Fibre 150. That's just $29.95 a month plus no setup fees. Search TalkTalk Full Fibre for deals that make sense. TalkTalk. CPI plus 3.7% annual increase from April 2023, subject to local availability. Average saving on Full Fibre 150 versus major competitors publicly available out of contract. Standard Fibre 65 equivalent only on 21st October.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
A very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio and live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. We've just done PMQs Unpacked, Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer. But what happened on the backbench contributions? Lara Spirit, Times Red Box reporter, was watching along so that you don't have to. She's come hurtling into the studio. What news do you bring? Who are we going to hear from first?
I'm bringing news from some Scottish questions today. We're going to hear from Stephen Flynn, who's obviously the SNP's representative. His second question around that IMF report that we saw yesterday with a particular reference to Brexit and a not so enthusiastic defence of Brexit, I thought, but it'd be interesting to hear what you think from Rishi Sunak.
OK, let's take a listen.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. Taken together, 2022 and 2023 are expected to be the worst years for living standards since the 1930s, and the economy is expected to perform worse than sanction-hit Russia. So as the Brexit ship sinks, with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition at the helm, does he blame those Scots who want to jump aboard the independence lifeboat?
Mr. Speaker, the number one factor that is impacting people's living standards, inflation, caused by high energy prices as a result of a war in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. It's got nothing to do with Brexit, and that's why the government is taking significant action with £900. But what I would say to him is, rather than obsess about constitutional arrangements, focus on delivering for the people of Scotland. That's what we will do.
I don't see what you mean, Lara.
Yeah, it wasn't particularly.
He didn't own Brexit in the way that perhaps Boris Johnson would do.
No, I think that's right. He was a sort of pragmatic Brexiteer. He's probably feeling pragmatically a bit disappointed with it at the moment. I mean, he did say it was nothing to do with Brexit, to his credit, but well, not his credit, but to give him credit for defending the thing he voted for. But yes, it wasn't a rolling paean of praise.
Yeah, in a way that actually from Boris Johnson on his social media has been banging on about Brexit and the doomsters and the gloomsters, and we need to all cheer up.
Indeed.
So there we are. Now, we had Stephen Flynn, obviously leader of the SNP, but excitingly, bring us news, Lara, of what we're going to hear in just a moment.
We had the return, for the first time since his departure, of Ian Blackford, his predecessor, to loud cheers and good to have you back from the floors of the House, with a question not wholly dissimilar from Stephen Flynn.
You do surprise me.
Not wholly dissimilar from Stephen Flynn, but take a listen to this because it's peak Ian Blackford and it's very characteristic, and it was just an interesting welcome back from the Commons.
Well, unfortunately, I'm being told we can't find it.
Can't find. I promise you, it happened.
Are you sure, Lara?
I was so desperate to have Ian Blackford.
Were you daydreaming about
Ian Blackford?
It's quite something.
Yeah.
I've been pining for
I
Ian
was
Blackford
so looking forward to
so
this.
long.
It's like one of those sort of comedians who stopped being funny years ago, but when they returned in a sort of chat show interview years later, you feel very warmly towards them.
Yeah, Billy Connolly.
That's
I think he stopped being
he tailed off.
Overall, we were just saying that Rishi Sunak managed to get the Tory MPs going in a way that I thought was, I mean, given there was quite a lot of things that Keir Starmer had managed to could have gone on. Actually, it was big cheers, quite a lot of sort of volume from Tory MPs cheering on Rishi Sunak today.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I thought that very clearly you could tell in Rishi Sunak's answers that he'd anticipated more of a strike-heavy attack line from Keir Starmer, which then didn't happen. But nonetheless, the kind of greatest hits from Rishi Sunak around that minimum service legislation and union barons and paymasters, as you correctly predicted before that session, Matt, still came out, and Tory MPs kind of very loyally loved it as well. So I think you're right to say that they were loud today, and also that just generally on the kind of standard stuff, I think Tory MPs very aware that it's their futures at stake too, and so they're quite keen to lend a hand on his defence on that. And many of them sympathetic to the fact that Rishi Sunak does believe that he acted quickly on that, or as quickly as possible. Many do believe what Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, said this morning, which is that it is right to wait for the outcome of that investigation. I think MPs sympathetic to that line too. So yeah, you're right. I think very happy to cheer Rishi Sunak quite loudly today.
And that's the argument number 10 have been making. Look, you may not have liked how quickly this was done, but it stabilises the Tory party to show people that there will be a process and that people won't just be kicked out. And, that's quite good for internal morale, which is a good part of what Sunak is doing at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to say, unfortunately, we can't find Ian Blackford anywhere. I think you might have imagined it.
He might have returned to his croft.
His humble croft. But so we talked a lot about Boris Johnson today, actually, and we can hear from him now. He's been speaking to Nadine Dorries. She's got a new show on Talk TV, which starts Friday this week. And she asked him for his latest thoughts about Partygate.
As you know, there's a parliamentary committee looking into some aspects of this, and I better be,
of course,
respectful of them. But I just repeat what I've said before, and I hope is obvious to everybody that anybody who thinks I was knowingly going to parties that were breaking lockdown rules in Number 10, or then knowingly covering up parties that were illicit, that were other people going to, that's all strictly for the birds. If anybody thinks that, they're out of their mind.
Yeah, they're out of their mind, apparently, if they think that. And talking up vaccines in Brexit, well, we were talking about Brexit. Here he is again, talking about the marvels, the life-saving marvels of Brexit.
Had it not been for our ability to do our own regulation, had it not been for the fact that we come out of the European Medicines Agency and the MHRA, the Medical Health Regulation Agency, was now totally free to decide how fast to approve a vaccine, we wouldn't have been able to do that vaccine rollout so fast. And, it is literally true that Brexit helped save lives. And, people's eyes, bulge a bit when you say that. But it happens to be true.
And it's something we didn't hear a lot at the time.
I'm proud of that. I'm proud of all the work that those people did.
That is...
Were your eyes bulging, Matthew?
My eyes bulge quite often. But there we are. There was Nadine Dorries speaking to Boris Johnson. It's on her Talk TV show on Friday night, showing Rishi Sunak how it's done. Talking up Brexit. Lara Spirit will be in your inbox in a couple of hours with PMQs Unpacked, the roundup from the Red Box email team. How can people subscribe, Lara?
At times.co.uk/redbox. You can sign up there for our morning email and also for today's email that will be in your inbox at 2:30.
Very good, 2:30. And then I'll be on with Jane and Fee at 4, talking about what happened in PMQs as well. If you wanted, if you want me just to repeat what you've already been hearing for the last 45 minutes. Tim Shipman, lovely to see you. What does the rest of the week hold for you?
Let's see. There's a few things percolating.
Percolating.
Well, one's always got an eye on Brexit.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of other things coming up next
Very
week, which
good.
I might delve deeply into.
And you can see all of that in the Sunday Times on Sunday. Right, coming up in the last, 17 minutes of the show, we'll have a geography lesson from Ben Clatworthy. We'll find out about the wolf that has attacked Ursula von der Leyen's pony. And we'll do the quiz. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Kate Borsay, tonight from 8 on Times Radio.
On a huge day of industrial action, we'll talk teachers with Daniel Kubede of the National Education Union. We'll also speak to Steve Chalk, founder of Oasis Academies, to find out how the day's gone on the front line. And Lord Bethel joins us to talk about the online safety bill.
Kate Borsay, tonight from 8 on Times Radio.
Ukraine. For invaders, we are a nightmare.